Tending to the animals, exhaustive, long days out in the fields, and barely enough food to keep them alive. The young men of ancient rural China doubted they could ever have a future. Astoundingly, the lower classes, and men in particular, were of keen interest to some members of the aristocracy. As seen in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the wealthiest in ancient China had an interest in male concubines, a privilege only afforded to the affluent. Some who were so inclined wished the most attractive and talented of young men for companionship. A young man from the most forgotten corners of the land could find himself sharing the company of the imperial palace, or even leading the imperial forces. Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we'll examine the not well-kept secret of male concubines in ancient China. Though a little-mentioned chapter of its history, ancient China had its own tradition of male concubinage. These concubines would be colloquially known as shaoshou, most commonly found during the Han Dynasty from 206 BCE to 220 CE. While they would be present in later dynasties, they were most prevalent across this period, where they could be found in the imperial court. The emperors themselves had male concubines, the Zhou dynasty notably holding the proverb, "Good-looking males can distract emperors from the wisdom of old intellects." While, like their female counterparts, the role of shaoshou was to bring companionship and sexual satisfaction to their male suitors. Like many concubines across antiquity, there was more to their story. Shaoshou would be sought after by the wealthiest of individuals in China's upper classes, akin to concubines across antiquity. The most affluent saw them as an embodiment of their higher status. A concubine in ancient China would find themselves as the prize of competition. The highest rollers would be competing with fellow opulent individuals for the company of the most talented and attractive male concubines. Curiously, upholding a theme of male concubinage in ancient history, half secret, half opulent display, and half forbidden, half desired. For sure, there were shaoshou in the imperial court, and they could go on to be in positions of influence and power as the emperor's desired companions. Yet on the other side, the Shang dynasty from the 16th to the 11th century BC would outlaw pederasty as one of the 10 criminal acts. Many Confucian scholars would also write against the practice of younger male companionship, despite any aristocratic favoring of the matter. They believed it was a violation of moral tradition. In concubine tradition, the desired was typically younger, often pubescent, and typically they would be from a much lower social class than their suitor. Specific to ancient China, the young males desired for companionship would usually be castrated before their concubinage began. This quite radical emasculation was somewhat a twofold decision. Firstly, to cement the concubine's position as the passive partner, and secondly, to deny them any chance of fathering children, and in doing so, secure their loyalty. It's clear to see across the writings of antiquity that shaoshou were not wives to their partners, and certainly not legally designated as such at any point. However, there are numerous accounts of the importance the concubines held in their partners' lives. No, not wives, but undoubtedly members of the household, and affectionately regarded. Shaoshou, once favored, were regularly granted privileges and brought gifts by their partners. Were concubines romantic replacements for wives and female partners? No, there is absolutely no evidence of this being the case. The anthropological accounts of the Han Dynasty pointed to a landscape of entirely normalized bisexuality among the nobility. Emperors had wives that would bear their issues, and conversely, many also took male concubines. While this is harder information to get a record of, some historians would tell you that even in ancient China, some relationships between men were formalized by marriage. Despite an acceptance among the aristocracy, these were exceptions and not the rule. Understandably, today there is an enlightened repellence towards pederastic relationships. Though, much like in ancient Greece and Rome, the use of concubines by the wealthiest of society was as much to do with status and power as it was to do with sexual mores. The role of a concubine in ancient China had a relationship and intimacy component, yet the concubine itself was somewhere between a prized possession and a highly valued investment. Should a young male be taken as a concubine to an older man of wealth, he would be given an education. Those of the lower classes were rare to see. training in all the arts from musical instruments to poetry and ceramics, as well as disciplines like the martial arts. Being the prized possession, concubines would often be called to entertain guests and partners with these trained skill sets. Many concubines were favored to a degree where they were given considerable responsibilities in the household, from administrative to housekeeping roles. One tale of concubinage in ancient China would stand the test of time to a remarkable extent. It would influence terminology in China for centuries to come. During his reign from 7 to 1 BC, Emperor Ai of the Han Dynasty would take a younger man for his xiaoshou. His name, Dongxian, and his loyalty and affection for the emperor have been documented. Perhaps most charmingly, there was a considerable degree of warm affection from the emperor in return. The famed tale regarded a nap of Emperor Ai. In his inland palace at Xi'an, the emperor was sleeping on a straw mat with his lover Dongxian. When he woke, he could see that Dongxian was still fast asleep, but the sleeve of his robe was underneath Dong's resting hand. To get up and go about his business, the emperor decided to cut the sleeve off his robe rather than wake his resting love. Despite this tale taking place some thousands of years ago, the passion of the cut sleeve has become an idiom in Chinese for homosexuality, a term born of tenderness and affection rather than othering and sexual dismissal. You go, China! More of that, please. Both Emperor Ai and Dongxian would die young and quite suddenly. While Emperor Ai passed at 24 years old, Dongxian had risen to the commander of the armed forces and the emperor's most senior official, a man on top of the world, though Dongxian was clearly bereft at the loss of Emperor Ai. A tragic end before his passing, Dongxian, his wife, and his children had all been moved inside the imperial palace grounds. After his death, Dongxian had been exiled, and within 2 weeks of the emperor's passing, Dongxian would take his own life. Not all tales of concubines in ancient China would end in heartbreak and loss. Some historians would tell you that all 10 emperors in the Han Dynasty showed open bisexuality. Each emperor had a male favorite. The Book of Han refers to them as Hanshu. Emperor Hui would take Hongru as his Hanshu. Emperor Gao would take Jiru as his Hanshu. Emperor Jing favored Zhou Ren, and Emperor Zhao favored Jingshang. Do you see the pattern here? Prior to the Han Dynasty, the Zhou Dynasty would also hold tales of same-sex love. The dynasty sprawling from 1046 to 256 BCE would spawn its own tales of the most powerful in the land falling for a beautiful younger man. These tales in turn would live on in terminology colloquially used to this very day. The tale of Duke Ling of Wei being sought for his affections by the younger Mizi Xia birthed its own phraseology. Mizi Xia, as the legend goes, was strolling through an orchard with the Duke. He bit into a peach and realized it was beautifully ripe. He turned and offered the rest to Duke Ling. While their story was far more layered than a kind exchange in an orchard, both the bitten peach and Mizi Xia have become bywords for homosexual love in Chinese. Considering the high price for pederasty and the surrounding world's heretical framing of sodomy, ancient Chinese lore is littered with tales of beautiful love between males. The Zhou dynasty holds the tale of the shared pillow tree. An attractive writer named Pan Zhang develops notoriety for his handsome face and reputed standing. When a young male student, Wang Zhongshan, comes to him to learn from his years of penmanship, the two fall in love at first sight. The story specifically states that the love was like that between husband and wife. It details how they shared their domestic lives for the rest of their days, sharing the same pillow and coverlet, with an everlasting intimacy with each other. In a special dovetail, the couple die together and are buried by the locals at the peak of Mount Luofu. In time, a tree would come to grow on that very spot, and the branches that grew from it would embrace one another. Love doesn't get much more everlasting than that, does it? This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.